Ce matin, je veux d'abord faire le point sur la demande d'aide qu'on a reçue du gouvernement du Québec mercredi soir et vous faire part des dernières nouvelles concernant l'approvisionnement en équipement médical. Le ministre de la Sécurité publique a travaillé avec Québec et le ministre de la Défense nationale et je peux maintenant confirmer qu'environ 125 membres des Forces armées canadiennes qui possèdent une formation dans le domaine de la santé iront prêter main forte aux travailleurs dans les CHSLD. On continue de travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec pour trouver d'autres façons de les appuyer,
We found other ways to support them, and with the Red Cross and the specialized volunteers registered with Health Canada. Regarding the procurement of medical equipment, Bell Canada made a $1.5 million gift for N95, or 1.5 million N95 gifts added to the surgical masks that we sent to provinces and territories this week.
Over the past few weeks, the pandemic has created anxiety and uncertainty for all Canadians, but some are going through an especially tough time. COVID-19 has brought many industries to a halt, and workers across the country are struggling as a result. From the start, our goal as a government has been clear: to help all Canadians get through these challenging times. As I've said many times before, we're here to support you, to lend you a helping hand when you need it most. Across the country, Canadians are standing shoulder to shoulder, and we're all in this together. Today, our government is announcing more help for workers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We're also announcing more help for small businesses and more help for those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. I'll start with the energy sector. Right now, workers and families are struggling because of things beyond their control. Both the devastating effects of the pandemic and the price war driven by foreign interests are a challenge. As a result, companies have had to slow down or pause their operations, leaving too many people out of work. To help these workers, our government will invest $1.7 billion to clean up orphan and inactive wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. These wells, which are no longer in use, can be detrimental not only to our environment, but to people's health. Think of the farmer who can't grow anything on his land because of an abandoned well a few steps away from his home. Think of the small town or Indigenous community struggling with this issue that has been festering for years or even decades. Cleaning them up will bring people back to work and help many landowners who've had these wells on their property for years but haven't been able to get them taken care of and the land restored. Our goal is to create immediate jobs in these provinces while helping companies avoid bankruptcy and supporting our environmental targets. In Alberta alone, these investments will maintain 5,200 jobs. We've listened to the concerns of landowners, municipalities, and Indigenous communities who want to make sure that the polluter pay principle is strengthened and that their voices are heard. I want to thank the Government of Alberta for working with us and listening to their concerns. Our government will also establish a $750 million emission reduction fund with a focus on methane to create and maintain jobs through pollution reduction efforts. This includes $75 million to help the offshore industry cut emissions in Newfoundland and Labrador. This fund will primarily provide repayable contributions to firms to make them more competitive, reduce waste and pollution, and most importantly, protect jobs. Right now, many energy firms are experiencing a cash crunch, so they don't have the funds to invest in technologies to reduce emissions or fix methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow for this kind of work to be done and create jobs people need during this difficult time. Through the wells and methane initiatives, we estimate that we will maintain roughly 10,000 jobs across the country. Just because we're in a health crisis doesn't mean we can neglect the environmental crisis. We're also working with BDC and EDC to expand credit support for at-risk medium-sized energy companies so they can maintain operations and keep their employees.
Our government will invest $1.7 billion to help to repair the wells, the orphan wells and abandoned wells in BC and Alberta. The goal is to create jobs for the energy sector workers and avoid for companies to go bankrupt, and also help reach our environment targets. Those unused wells for oil can present risk not only for our environment but also for our health. By cleaning them up, we will create jobs for workers. We will also help people that have those old wells for years and cannot get rid of them. We are thinking that this will maintain 5,200 jobs in Alberta only, and we've elaborated this policy with the municipal partners and the government of Alberta, and I want to thank them for their contribution. Our government will also put in place a $750 million fund to reduce emissions that will focus on pollution caused by methane to create jobs. From this amount, $75 million will be allocated to oil and gas companies offshore in Newfoundland and Labrador to reduce their emissions. This fund will give reimbursable contribution to companies in order to protect jobs, increase competitivity, and reduce pollution. Now, the energy sector workers have cash flow problems, and they don't have the funds. Those companies don't have the funds to invest in technologies to repair methane leaks. And today's announcement will enable those companies to do those works and create jobs for their workers during these tough times. This public health crisis should not keep us from acting to counter the climatic crisis that still goes on. And with the initiative to clean the wells and this fund to reduce emissions, we are estimating that about 10,000 jobs will be maintained. At the same time, we are working also with the BDC and EDC to increase the credit for energy or middle-sized energy companies that are particularly at risk. Once again, the objective is to allow those companies to continue their activities in order to keep their employees.
Now, I want to turn to what we're going to do next for small businesses and the people they employ. Over the past few weeks, we've taken a number of steps to support these employers and mostly their employees. We introduced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to help keep people on the payroll. We launched and expanded the Canada Emergency Business Account for those businesses struggling with cash flow. But Ministers Joly, Ng, Baines, and others have heard that some businesses are still falling through the cracks. To fix that, our government will provide $962 million to regional development agencies and the Community Futures Network. This funding will help ensure that more businesses, especially smaller employees based in more rural parts of the country, or those who don't have a relationship with a traditional financial institution, are getting the support that they need. We're also going to give $270 million to Futurepreneur and the Industrial Research Assistance Program to support innovators and other early-stage development firms that don't qualify for the wage subsidy but still need help.
Regarding the small companies, we are announcing today two other investments. First, our government will give $962 million to the regional development agencies and to the collectivity or community development agencies that will help the small companies or small businesses that do not qualify for the emergency response fund or benefits, and Also, the government will give $270 million to the programs for industrial research in order to support innovators and startups that are not eligible to the salary subsidy. We have also news for those working in the arts sector and the culture sector and sports sector. Those are sectors that, like the small businesses that I've just described, are not eligible to the help or programs because their revenue models are different or they do not operate in the same way. Since the beginning of this crisis, artists bring comfort, laughter, and happiness in our lives. And athletes continue to inspire us and encourage us and make us proud. Those working in the arts sector and culture and sports are helping us experience our passion and make us dream. And these days, as we're all home and we're isolating, they make us feel less alone. And those are just a few reasons why we need to be there for them as they are there for us. Our government will give $500 million to Heritage Canada to support our artists, our creators, and our rising stars in the world of sports. With these funds, those people will get salary support, and organizations will have access to funding if they have trouble in terms of cash flow.
Give $500 million to Heritage Canada to support those who work in the arts, culture, and sports sectors. Like the small businesses I was talking about, people and businesses in these sectors do not have access to some of the help we've announced because of how the companies operate or how revenues are generated. With this investment, people will be able to receive wage support, and organizations that are struggling with cash flow will be able to access financing. At the same time, we continue to support those who've lost their jobs with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. So far, over 7.5 million payments have been made. That's money sent directly to those who need it most. I want to, again, thank our amazing public servants who are processing these claims at record speeds. Moving forward, we will be releasing the latest figures on the CERB through the government's open data portal 3 times a week, so academics, researchers, and Canadians can keep track of the work being done. We will continue to provide and open up data so that we can get the best advice from experts and continue to help Canadians. I want to end this morning by reminding everyone that today is the 38th anniversary of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which underpins who we are as a country and who we strive to be as a people. It protects the right of each and every one of us to be who we are, to worship how we want, to love whom we love. At the heart of the Charter is the notion of choice, that we can choose the kind of life we want for ourselves. As our country confronts this pandemic, I'm especially grateful that Canadians have chosen to protect each other and care for one another. To everyone who has stayed home and followed public health recommendations, thank you. Making that choice together today will ensure that we remain who we are as Canadians for generations to come. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je suis maintenant content de prendre les questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Merci. Thank you. The first question, Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press, line open.
Prime Minister, you've expressed a preference for virtual parliament. Many regions of Canada have terrible internet connections, and they tend to be the ones that feel the most ignored by Ottawa. Are you comfortable with having virtual sittings if MPs can't participate in real time from their homes?
Obviously, the point of virtual sittings would be to ensure that Canadians who are not within driving distance of Ottawa continue to have their views represented and their concerns heard. That is a technological challenge that we will work very, very hard on to ensure that as we move forward on virtual Parliament solutions, as the Speaker and the House of Commons work on that, that we make sure that every voice can be heard of the 338 Canadians. At the same time, we have proposed to the opposition parties that Parliament could come back every single week to discuss legislation and to ensure that there is accountability. We need to make sure that our democracy continues to function, and this is something that we are very serious about. We recognize right now, on the books, there is a rule that says that 338 MPs need to get on flights Friday or Sunday evening to come back to Ottawa on Monday morning as Parliament is supposed to resume. That is obviously not a good idea. We are not in normal circumstances, so we're negotiating with all opposition parties to try and make sure we can find a way to keep the important work of our democracy going while at the same time respecting public health advice.
Well, first, to look at the virtual parliament is important. It will be important to make sure that it enables MPs from every part of the country to share the preoccupations of their citizen, and that's why we're working with the Commons in order to make sure that there are technology solutions for this. At the same time, we acknowledge that our democracy must continue to work, and that's why we proposed that Parliament can resume every week in order to adopt bills and to make sure that accountability and questions can be raised to the government and asked to the government. We hope that the opposition parties will accept this proposal. Otherwise, the Parliament has to sit with 338 MPs next Monday morning. I believe we acknowledge that it's not time to do this.
And Prime Minister, the Manitoba Premier has asked for an emergency credit agency to access better interest rates. Governor Polo says that your government did not ask the Bank of Canada to help with the provincial debt market. He said no one has asked us to do anything on the provincial front. The Premier has also asked to put public servants on EI. Today's job announcement doesn't with the provincial debt market. So my question is, when will the provinces learn what you're doing for their debts and what is already off the table?
I had an excellent conversation last night with the premiers of all the provinces and territories. This issue was brought up, and I assured them that Finance Canada is looking at it. We recognize that different provinces carry different debt loads and different challenges on access to credit. The Bank of Canada has taken significant measures that have had a positive impact on provincial coffers. At the same time, we will continue to make sure that provinces across the country are able to give the support they need to give to their citizens.
Thank you. Next question, moderator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Althea Raj, Huffington Post. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've announced a number of measures today and also earlier this week changes to help those with some income apply for the CRB. You've lowered the threshold for some business owners to apply for interest-free loans. But still, a number of people I've spoken with this week are not impacted by any of these changes. What should people in these positions, people who are left out and who have a hard time making ends meet, do? Should they apply for the CRB or should they wait for your government to come up with another fix?
From the very beginning, we knew we had to help as many people as we possibly could who needed the help as quickly as possible. That's why we moved forward with two very big, very strong programs, both the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has sent out over 7.5 million payments already, and the wage subsidy, which will kick in a few weeks, which is allowing employers to rehire their employees so that when the economy bounces back, people will still have those links to their jobs while they are supported in this time of difficulty. But from the beginning, we recognize that moving quickly and broadly would leave gaps. And that's why over the past weeks, we have been announcing almost every single day new measures that tweak the proposals we've made, that expand other proposals, that create new initiatives to try and make sure we're getting help to everyone who needs them. The announcements we've made today around help for the arts and cultural sectors, for sporting organizations, for small businesses like startups, for small businesses in rural areas, for the range of workers in the energy sector who are facing layers of calamity right now, are the kinds of things that we're making sure that everyone is getting the help we need. We are continuing to listen to Canadians who are expressing that they are not getting the help they need, and we are constantly looking for ways to help them.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. So are you basically saying wait until the government comes up with another fix? Because as you know, on Saturday, MPs voted to support a motion that basically said that if you need help, the government is going to ensure that if you applied for CERB and you weren't supposed to be eligible, that you would be unjustly penalized. So is the government saying that the worst thing that will happen to you if you apply for CERB but don't actually qualify, that you will have to pay the money back in full next year? Is that the worst thing that will happen to people who apply for CERB because they feel they need it?
We expect people to apply for the programs for which they qualify, and we are therefore working to make sure we're expanding the qualifications so that people who need the help will get them. We will continue to announce measures that will include more and more people, help more and more people as we move forward, because for all the millions of people and companies and businesses and employers that we're helping across this country, we know there is more to do, and that's what we're continually announcing almost every day, new measures to fix support for people in particular situations.
We recognize that the programs we've created quickly to help as much people as possible are not sufficient for people in some particular situations. So for many weeks now, we are announcing almost every day some modifications and enlargement of different programs in order to enable people to receive more help according to the programs that we are putting in place.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. J'aimerais revenir sur votre plan
I'd like to come back on your help plan for the oil sector that you just unveiled. Many were asking of you, or were expecting that you would do more. Some were suggesting that the government takes equity in the oil companies like the government did for the car companies in 2008. Are you ready to do so? And if not, why not going through to this avenue? Our focus since the start was to help Canadians who are in a tough situation, helping families that are suffering, helping those who need help. And that's why the salary subsidy and the Canadian emergency response benefit are there to help millions of Canadians in all the sectors across the country. Now, we saw very clearly that the oil sector has particular challenges due to what's going on the international markets, on the oil price, but also due to the COVID-19, due to the demand. All those issues pushes us to do a little bit more, and that's exactly what we're doing. And we will continue to look at other ways that we can do things, but we want to make sure always to have first and foremost and make sure that we're helping families and workers who need help during these tough times and emergency time.
We took as an approach from the very beginning that we need to help Canadians. We need to help workers and families who are hit by this COVID-19 slowdown and shutdown. That's why we move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that has helped millions upon millions of Canadians, and the wage subsidy, which has allowed companies to rehire workers and will ensure that families across the country get much more support. And that is across all industries, across the country. However, we recognize that certain industries are facing even more difficult times. The oil and gas sector, because of the global price war, because of the lowered demand related to COVID, and because of the measures brought in to counter COVID itself, those families are particularly hard hit. And that's where this initiative, which will create or preserve 5,200 jobs in Alberta, and the other initiatives, which will lead to perhaps 10,000 jobs across the energy sector, are the kinds of things that we can do right now. Of course, we will continue to work with partners and concerned sectors across the country as we move forward to see if there's a need to do more.
En suivi, Marie?
Some were worried that following your announcement that your help be tinted by personal conditions of certain members of your position of certain members of your cabinet on the environment, and now you're announcing help to clean the abandoned wells to reduce the emission situation. But what will you tell them of those people who could be disappointed by the importance of this help plan, and you are accused to be tinted by those personal conviction of members of your cabinet? Listen, the personal conviction of the members of the cabinet were always, and we've always been united on this, always to help Canadians to fight through this COVID-19 crisis and make sure that we get through this and we continue to be an extraordinary country in the years coming. This is our priority. That's why the help that we are sending to workers with the two main measures, the Canadian salary subsidy and the Canadian emergency response benefit, are doing things that, and we're doing other things to help what was requested by the government of Alberta to clean up the wells, to make sure that companies that need to reduce their emissions even more have the means to make the necessary investments in order to reduce their emissions, particularly regarding methane. And that's a choice that we've decided to go to prepare a future that where every Canadians will see themselves and have a better job.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Mr. Trudeau, if we go back to deployment of Canadian Armed Force personnel, where do these military come from? What will be their role? And why the amount is limited, whereas the Quebec situation is really precarious, as you know. We worked with the government of Quebec yesterday to find ways to send those 125 troops will bring significant help to those institutions in Quebec. But we recognize we can do more through the Red Cross and through the bank of volunteers we have. The government of Quebec used their own bank of volunteers, and we will continue to find ways to help Quebec the best way we can, and we will always try to do more. And the situation with the armed force is that we are always limited in our resources, our medical resources, within any organization, including the armed forces. Just to be more precise on this, I understand that there's a medical expertise, but they could be there to serve meals or do other tasks. But Mr. Trudeau, there's an information circulating that there's a deal concluded with the Americans on the closing of the deal. Can you just do an update on this? As I've always said, we are in continual conversations with the Americans, who are our neighbors, our friends, our partners, to make sure that we all have the means to protect our citizens. And my priority will always be to protect Canadians. And we will continue to work with Americans to make sure that the border remains safe. And I often said it, I'm not expecting for these borders borders to be opening in a short lapse. We will continue to listen to science. We will continue to look and supervise the evolution of this virus in Canada and across the world before going ahead with such a decision. But I want to underline that the conversations with Americans are continuing in a very positive fashion.
As I've said many times, conversations are constant and ongoing with the American administration on issues of mutual concern, including the border. As I've said, we do not feel that reopening the border anytime soon is likely. My responsibility is to ensure the protection and safety of Canadians. That is what we will continue to do. And the conversations with the Americans have been extremely aligned and extremely productive.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, for weeks now, you have been promising relief and aid for the energy sector. What you've announced today is going to help a comparatively small number of workers. It isn't going to do anything for the sector overall to help deal with devastating impact of this virus and the downturn in the world oil markets. My question is this it? Is this the package you were promising? And if so, what do you say to people in Western Canada, particularly, who was expecting more substantial relief?
The first things we did was move forward with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that's putting money in the pockets of more than 7 million Canadians, including many people in the oil and gas sector who've lost their paychecks because of this COVID-19 crisis. On top of that, the wage subsidy allows Canadian workers to continue to receive their salaries, to continue to stay connected to their work in the oil and gas sector, which are significant helps for a major industry across this country. On top of that, we've been working with the government of Alberta and with industry to look at other things that can be necessary. We heard very clearly that the methane regulations that we are bringing in will be a challenge for industries to meet, and industry and others asked that we therefore back off on the methane regulations. We decided instead to lend them money to help them keep people working to upgrade and update their measures so we can continue to fight climate change and reduce emissions while keeping people at work. We've also heard very clearly, and not just from industry, but from municipalities, particularly rural municipalities, landowners across Alberta, that the issue of persistent orphan or inactive wells is a real challenge. And this is an opportunity for us to make sure that Albertans are getting to work in cleaning up their province, at the same time as we've gotten commitments by the government of Alberta to strengthen the regulations so we see fewer orphan and inactive wells in the future. We've also made credit available for medium-sized oil and gas companies who are facing particular challenges in terms of liquidity right now. We will continue to look at ways we can support important industries in this country, including the oil and gas sector. We look forward to doing that while at the same time keeping our focus squarely on the families and workers who need our help.
Prime Minister Julie Van Dusen, CBC News. You spoke to the premiers last night, so I'm hoping you can update us on this. Blaine Higgs, as an example, has said he's hoping to get his economy going by the summer. John Horgan this morning on CBC said that he and his Washington state counterpart could decide when the border opens. So I'm wondering, who decides all this? Is it you? Is it them? And if it is you, will there be national standards to guide them?
We talked last night about how important it is to be coordinated and agreed on the principles and the approaches that we take, while at the same time recognizing that the situation in PEI is very different from the situation in Ontario, very different from the situation in BC. There will be regional approaches, as there have been all along, to the next steps, but we all agreed that we need to continue to remain very, very vigilant as we carefully look at reopening the economy, about relaunching certain sectors in the future. We will continue our coordination around the principles and the steps that need to be taken. But of course, this is Canada, which means that there are very different needs and very different approaches that will be in place across the country. What we will be working on to coordinate and collaborate on is ensuring that the messages that get out and that the lens that we take and the data that we collect and the way we do this is aligned and coordinated so that we can maximize our chances of getting through this without having to fall back into self-isolation the way we have been these past few weeks.
One of the principles we agreed with the premiers is the importance of coordinating, of collaborating in order to make sure that the steps we will be taking regarding the reopening of the economy, the relaxation of rules regarding isolation or social distancing are made in a coordinated fashion. Now, of course, different provinces, different regions will have different needs, different realities, and we acknowledge and respect this, of course, but if we can make sure of a good coordination so that Canadians understand that the same principles are at play across the country, that we are collecting data the same way, that we analyze our realities, that we are answering vigilantly in a similar fashion, then it will maximize our chances of going through this crisis without falling into other periods of isolation or economic slowdown.
In global news, Prime Minister, Canada's largest oil and gas lobby group says the federal government should consider suspending dozens of environmental regulations, laws, and policies due to the economic and health crisis triggered by COVID-19. Critics call it a crass attempt to exploit the pandemic. How do you respond to the letter? And are some of the 30 requests still being considered by the government?
Just because we are in one crisis right now doesn't mean we can forget about the other crisis, the climate crisis that we are also facing as a world, as a country. But we recognize that, for example, moving ahead with the methane regulations is something very difficult for companies right now in the oil and gas sector who are strained because of the multiple challenges they're facing both on the global stage and on the lower demand. That's why we're making investments in supporting those companies directly so that they can meet those methane reduction targets with funds that we're giving them so that we can stay on track to protect future generations and to reduce emissions from our industry. This is something that Canadians understand, that we need to continue to move forward, but we need to help people in different ways as we move forward. That will be the lens that we take.
And on a separate matter, China has revised its numbers on the Wuhan deaths, increasing them by 50%. Do you think this is a statistical verification, as China claims, or proof they covered it up?
I think we all need to be very attentive to how data flows around the world and be very thoughtful about how we process different information and how we apply the lessons learned from elsewhere around the world to what we do. We will continue to work with partners and allies and international institutions and organizations as we figure out how to get through today and tomorrow. But there will be many questions to ask once we are through this on how various countries behaved and what sort of principles we need to learn from and conclusions we need to draw as we move forward. Je pense que nous avons besoin.
I believe that we need to look attentively and carefully to the data shared by countries, different countries across the world. Of course, we will have conclusions to get to at the end on the behavior of certain countries. But for now, we must work together, collaborate, and do everything we can in order to learn and better protect our citizens at home.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, other world leaders have raised serious questions about China's handling of this pandemic and whether it holds responsibility for not containing it within its borders. It's not just the White House, it's also leaders in France and the United Kingdom. Here at home, your government has taken the opposite approach, with one former Canadian ambassador calling Ottawa's approach almost humiliating. In your answer just now, you didn't even mention China by name. So why is your government so reluctant to acknowledge China's possible faults in this pandemic?
My job right now is to make sure that Canadians get the best support, the best protection, and are able to get through this as best we possibly can. That means getting the equipment that we need. That means ensuring that the cooperation and the collaboration on the international stage is done properly. That means focusing right now on today and tomorrow and how we're going to keep Canadians safe. There will be plenty of time to point fingers, to ask questions, to draw conclusions, and to ensure that there are consequences for things that different countries may have done during this pandemic. Right now, my job is to look out for Canadians.
Okay. My responsibility as Prime Minister is to look for the health and safety of Canadians. That's exactly what I'm doing, and that's what I will continue to do. We will continue to work with different countries, with international institutions to make sure that we are doing everything necessary to get through this. Then after, of course, there will be some questions, there will be some reflections, and maybe some consequences for different countries, depending on how they've reacted on this against this world crisis. But for now, I must stay anchored in what is important for Canadians.
So are you suggesting, I guess, that, you know, China might withhold PPE or something? Is that why you're not mentioning China, as you still continue to do? And on Julie's question about the way out of this, what level of testing do we need to see across Canada in order to start reopening the economy?
We've looked at the need for many more tests. So we see that testing has been a key part of controlling the spread, not just knowing who has developed COVID and can pass it on, but actually being able to control the spread through contact tracing, through isolation and quarantine measures. Testing is a key part of it. We need to continue to ramp up our testing capacities. We need to do a better job of coordinating on testing methodology and approaches across the provinces so that we can have a better vision of what is exactly happening. But testing certainly needs to increase as we move forward. Fortunately, it is increasing as we move forward.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Philippe Vincent, Fossil Radio-Canada. Sur les 125 militaires...
On the 125 troops, medical crews of the armed force, how many doctors, how many nurses, where do they come from? Do we take some away from civilian hospitals? And especially, when will they be able to go to the CHSLD, the long-term care institutions in Quebec? Regarding details, we will have more in the hours coming, but this afternoon, there will be some Canadian Armed Force members who will be showing up on the field to evaluate what approach they can take and what will be their positioning. And in the days coming, we will see a big part of those 125 military that will arrive on the field in Quebec. On the 500 million to artists, where will it go, to who, how? Why isn't it the emergency response benefit not helping them? What I can say is Minister Guilbeault and the other ministers will be there for another press event in a few minutes to answer all those questions and many others on how we will help our artists. And we acknowledge that this is a situation where many artists are facing real difficulties, and we need our artists. We need to have them to continue to make us dream, even if the tough times, especially in the tough times, and that's why we will be there to help them.
Merci tout le monde.
So key announcement.